So here we go. So we've got a great topic today that we've discussed with Will, and I actually love this story as well about the tortoise and the hare. In fact, I actually had to watch the Disney clip in order to write the email for this, and actually it's got quite a bit deep meaning to it, although it's a lot of fun. But really, it's today's discussion is really about the new world order, new beginnings, what next, and why running a business with a strong social purpose can be profitable. And we'll be discussing about extraordinary times requires exceptional leadership, why select customers that are true to your core values. I guess that must be quite a big thing in the construction space, because otherwise they can cause some real problems. And that's my phone, sorry about that. And how you can leave a lasting legacy with your business. So I think it's going to be a great discussion today. In terms of what I'd just like to illustrate here as well is just to remember that we're all here for each other. And I think what's really nice, those of you who have joined us in the live stream today, I think you've actually got to know each other quite well through the chat, because obviously we've got a number of regular people here. Running a business can be tough, whether you're a company of one or a company of 1,000. It's just the problems are different. And if you could very kindly share today's stream on Facebook, etc., that helps us to build the engagement out there. If you want to like what you're seeing, if you do enjoy it, and also do feel free to subscribe to the YouTube channel as well. It helps us to get the message out there. And in terms of introduce yourselves via the chat, if you could just indicate what you're really passionate about, ideally a little bit more from a personal point of view rather than a business point of view, because people buy into our own personal passion with these things, and why you do it and how you like to make a difference. And as I say, be bold with your questions. Makes it a lot more fun and entertaining. And we're very much about helping people to bring their sales forward, amplify their brand, and get their turn back. We love to make a difference. And obviously, we like to show you the how and the right methodologies and systems to help you to achieve great results. A very quick introduction for myself and Miro, and we'll introduce Will properly in just a moment. But I'm, as you know, the founder of Business Growth Bureau. I feel very passionately in the importance of circular relationships. If you make everyone feel good when they work with you, it doesn't matter whether a client, prospect, investor, supplier, associate, partner, team member, leader, so on. If you make everyone feel good about working with you, you end up by developing a really strong organization. And it's also, you end up with working with really nice people, which associates with some brand values and everything else like this. And Miro, very quick introduction from yourself, if that's okay.
Yeah, as you said, we work with some really nice people, which is what I love. I mean, I love building relationships with people, helping them in any way I can, and give them first-class customer service. That's what I really enjoy.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you very much. I see that Karen's been quite cheeky here. She's pretending she's from Mauritius, but I know she's not. She's up in Kenilworth.
Oh, shit. And I was thinking, how did she manage to go on holiday?
It's funny because I knew that as well, because I was speaking to her earlier on today. Daniel, welcome. Thanks for joining us. You're in sunny Essex, and Damien, thanks for sharing what you're passionate about as well. So keep those points coming. And now, Alex Barrett, Will Barrett, get your name right. I do apologise over that. It's because I saw Alex in the feed. But Will, obviously, be great to hear a little bit about you and what you're really passionate about. What I'd be really interested to know is, could you just share over a sort of 1 or 2 minute period, just a little bit of a personal introduction on what you personally are really passionate about, and what are the real motivators or drivers for you personally?
Wow. I don't feel very qualified to do this on live stream, let alone about myself. What do I feel about passion? I'm when it comes to business, and particularly the built environment and construction sector, I think it's a really empowering sector. Which we take hugely for granted. So every time we look around us, there's roads, there's buildings, and they're just taken for granted because they're just there for a long time. We glance over them. And I always try and take a moment sometimes wherever I am, whether that's in London, particularly when I'm in London or a big city, and just wonder how it was built, how long it took to build, and what an impact it has, and how the life cycle of those buildings have such a long impact and a much larger impact than we can ever imagine. And that leads me then on to thinking, if we can construct inspiring places for people who want to go there, and they're the right environment, they're the right temperature, that they cultivate the right environment for you to perform, and for teams and people to perform their best, there's a huge opportunity there we're potentially missing by providing substandard environments, so whether that's in terms of longevity or just in terms of comfort. So it's a really exciting sphere to be in, particularly at the moment when a lot of this is coming to the fore about how we live and work, and that's all being questioned at the moment. But we've got a lot of history there. When you look back at the existing buildings we've built, have been there for many years and performed very well. So there's a bit of a conundrum now. I haven't worked that bit out, but I know it's quite an exciting place to be, and we've got a big part to play in becoming carbon net zero in the future. Nice. And how we can, the built environment is one of the keys to unlocking a more sustainable future.
Yeah, lovely. I'm sorry, I did slightly set you up there, actually. I didn't mean to do that. But obviously, before you, because it's, Francis Construction is very much a family business, as it's been around for almost 100 years, I believe. Is that correct? But before you came into this business, because you basically took over from your father, if I've got that correct. Is that about 10 years ago? Yeah. But prior to becoming involved with Francis Construction, you were very much as worked in sort of the private sector for quite a while as well, didn't you? And also, isn't one of your great beliefs in the education system? Weren't you involved quite a bit with some form of academy as well?
Yeah.
I'd love to hear a little bit about that, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, I spent 7 or 8 years working for a tier 1 national contractor, a company called Wilmot Dixon, who had a fantastic training program and really, and still are, a very good company. Got a good grounding there, and worked in New Zealand for a year as well, working on earthquake buildings as well, pre the Christchurch earthquake crisis. But yeah, going back to your point about academies, I do think the point you make there, and we've discussed, is around how we can change generations by creating the right environment. So one of the projects I worked in East London, it was a school. The truancy was very high, attendance very low. I think keeping hold of good quality staff was very difficult. I was lucky to be involved in helping construct this new academy right at the beginning of the Building Schools for the Future programme for the government. And within 2 or 3 years of this school opening, the academy opening, the truancy rate was right down. There were queues around the corner to get places for students, to get places in the school. Wow. And there was actually queues around the corner to be a teacher there. So I think once you can really attract the top level teaching, you can create the right level, right environment, have the right features there. Attendance was up. Exam grades go up very quickly, and then you can change generations very quickly by providing the right environment and inspiring place to be. So that was I was quite young in my career then, and it made me realise how important creating the right environment and the right culture is, and how that part of the built environment can play.
No, that's fantastic as well. I know that through our sort of conversation we had before the live stream today, this whole thing around running Francis Construction with a real sense of social purpose, and I think we talked about potentially setting things up ultimately as a B Corp. Is that correct? I know it's more of a US standard, I think, rather than the UK standard, isn't it? Is that correct?
Yes.
But effectively, it's of this whole principle around social enterprise and community and giving back is, if I've understood it correctly, is a very big driver for you, isn't it, in terms of wanting to make a difference?
I think it's now a global enterprise that started in the US, and we're starting to see businesses from every sector. So particularly clothing and I think food are 2 sectors that have really latched onto it. And it's about being carbon neutral as well. And very sustainable. It's something we are looking into at the moment. It's very difficult for a construction business, and that's not to say it's impossible, but a lot of our emissions are around transport. Whilst we can get a lot of materials, and there's great examples of where we can actually procure some cladding material, for instance, that we, from the same manufacturer, from a well-known, I won't mention them now, but just in case I get in trouble, that you can produce, they have one factory in Poland and one in Sweden. And the one in Sweden is using geothermal energy to produce their embedded carbon in that product is very low. But the one in Poland uses normal electricity or normal energy, so the embedded carbon in that product is the same. You wouldn't tell the difference. Looking at them, they're exactly the same product there. And they're usually fully recyclable. We've done a lot of work in the industry, or the industry has done a lot of work about looking at recycling. But embedded energy is the next big stuff, and how much energy construction materials are usually heavy, and we are transient by nature. We have to go to the site to build. We've got to build where we can't control that. So the embedded energy in the transportation costs are, and the heavy manufacturing it takes to make these materials is something that's quite difficult to address, but not impossible. And we're making leaps and bounds. As a business, we recycle something like we divert 98.6% of our waste from landfill, which is, that is a change over the last 15 years. From 100% would have gone to landfill pretty much. As an industry, we're making real inroads. It is steady progress, but there's really interesting forums and discussion, debate, and these things are actually getting right. So one of the projects we did 5 or 6 years ago, we actually moved a building. The building was 10 years old. We took it down. It's a big warehouse, about 60,000 square feet. We moved it down, moved it a mile, and put it back up again. And that saved about half the cost of a new building, and it also saved about half the carbon of constructing a new building by that way.
Wow, that's quite phenomenal, isn't it? So some really big changes. So what we'll do then, if we just sort of move on a little bit to the next part. Thank you, Will, for explaining a little bit about that as well. And obviously, we're going to be discussing this today in this context. And obviously, I think the nice thing is because your personal brand values and you're very driven by a real sense of social purpose, that so very much is filtered through into your organization, isn't it? And before we perhaps start on these points, you basically continue to enjoy really strong, steady growth, haven't you? Over the last, you took over from your father, was about 10 years ago in France's construction. Is that correct?
Right.
Is it about 20% compounding growth that you've achieved over the last 10 years?
Yeah, roughly. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's phenomenal. What would you put a lot of that down to?
That is down to repeat business, I think, and developing strong client relationships.
Yeah.
So 95% of our business is repeat or continued business. I don't think you can ever rest on your laurels. You're always looking for a new client, but at the same token, being a historic business, we quite often have worked for people in the past as well. So it's quite an easy stat to help us sometimes. But regardless of the statistics, I think developing long-term relationships is very much our core, rather than going for short-term, potentially more profitable relationships. Honesty, transparency, and trust, and taking a long-term approach is really important. I don't know how many of the audience here are familiar in the construction, but construction does have a bit of a bad rep. Most people think about construction being the builder next door who's making lots of noise at the wrong time, or parked or blocked them in, or isn't turning up when they've got a roof leak, or the plumber who keeps letting them down and not fitting their bathroom, because that's the day-to-day experience we have in our homes, which is quite emotive because it's where we live. But that's not, there's a large part of the sector is in that domestic environment, but a lot of the major project work that goes on, I think it's really important to develop those values. And I think that's not to belittle the smaller traders, who a lot of them do have very good values and do very excellent work as well. Yeah,
I think unfortunately a lot of work encourages, especially from perhaps local central government as well, encourages short-termism. They'll perhaps buy on price, but possibly look less at the quality and also the environmental credentials. Although I think a lot of that's changing now, because it's being forced upon local authorities and several central governments, if that's correct, I guess. But is that the case in your experience?
Yeah, yes and no. So the government has just launched a new plan to try and encourage a bit of a longer term approach. Traditionally, what happens in procurement, particularly by large organisations or particularly government and local government, is they like to be as transparent as possible in terms of how they procure. Now, quite often we lose a bit of the value because it's done by people and procurement teams who aren't necessarily involved in the delivery or understand the process. Often that means that the lowest price is used as the common denominator for selecting a contractor to work with. And I'm a real advocate for looking at real value, and it's a very difficult thing very difficult question to answer. But it applies across. Why do you buy a slightly nicer car? How do you quantify that experience? Why do you buy slightly nicer clothes or things like that? But the trouble is, when you come to construction, it quite often it's an irregular purchase. It's quite often a significant capital expenditure, and for people to spend a bit more is a difficult justification, especially when you might be presenting to a board of people to say, right, these are my tender prices. This is the spread. Everyone's default is to go to the cheapest because it's usually a large capital expenditure. But is that the best value? And to actually decide what is value in construction is a difficult thing. It's quite a complicated, bespoke situation. There's a lot of similarities across many projects, but every project is bespoke in one way or another. So trying to create that value proposition is really difficult, and a lot of people shy away from it. So it's something I constantly try and challenge, and look at output as well. And rather than the simple build, look at how what do we want the output of that building to be. No, exactly. I think it's going to be some great discussions around these different points. So obviously we talked about obviously we've been living in this strange world for the last 12 months, and this whole area around the New World Order, new beginnings, what next, in itself is a really big subject. And I just wondered, from your point of view, obviously you've equally had a bit before that, you had the scenario around Grenfell, God forbid, where basically this is obviously a very complex area, and obviously it's wrapped up in all sorts of legal issues around that as well. But where perhaps things were done so much on price that it led to inferior cladding being put up in buildings and this type of stuff. How's sort of construction changed over the last say 5-6 years? And also moving on a little bit from that as well, are people's needs now different? For example, I saw something yesterday, I think, which referred to office space. I think one of the big banks in London was talking about reducing its office space by 30 or 40%. Presumably that's going to mean not only redundancies, but also perhaps a lot more people working from home. So if we deal with a scenario first with the old world order, perhaps when things weren't so good and people were buying things on price, and perhaps the contractors were cheating and using poor quality materials, and compared to now, what are some of the biggest changes you've seen up to the period of, say, up to March last year? Well, I think it goes back a bit further than that, actually. As an industry, we've written multiple reports back to Latham and Egan back in the 80s about what we need to do to improve the industry. We still haven't reached those targets in many cases, and the main reason I put to that is the boom bust cycle. So in our industry, the construction industry operates on very low margins, net profit margins, and what tends to happen is that when times are good, everyone invests in apprenticeships and technology, and we tend to make some great leaps. And then very quickly, when recession hits, we tend to cut apprenticeships, cut investment in technology, cut investment in R&D. We tend to lose really quality people out of the industry, and they go to other sectors and come out of the construction sector. And what that means is every time we take 1 or 2 steps forward, we hit a recession and we go back 1 step. So progress isn't as quick as it could be. That leads me on to what's happened the last 10 years. Since the last recession of 2008, we've made some really great strides around technology. and apprenticeships to many in many ways as well. And that the apprenticeships isn't just in construction, but I think there's been some really strong movement around not necessarily trade apprenticeships. There's been some positives there, but more about professional apprenticeships and getting people into the industry. But the greatest strides we've had is about technology, and I won't go into the exact details, but that's been some great issues. What do I think? Grenfell, for instance, was built around, I think it was probably built before they really got the benefit of that technology. We've also seen quite a strong shift in building control. So most of you will be familiar with building control if you've done any projects at home. That's basically what the standards we have to build to. It's not quite that simple because there are lots of them, but there's been some strong shifts and some consolidation in building control about what we need to achieve, and particularly around environmental performance. And they are constantly improving. Unfortunately, the COVID issue has slowed those down a little bit, but we'd like to see those come back strongly. And they'll cause some problems as well, because we quite often build in traditional ways, and it's challenging how we're going to achieve new levels of thermal performance and air tightness and things like that, and low energy buildings. But I think as an industry, we're up for a challenge. There's some really interesting technology coming on stream to deliver those buildings, whether they be homes or sports centres or whatever it may be. So it's very exciting from that point of view. I just hope this last recession hasn't knocked us back too far and meant people have cut very hard just to survive. And that's the danger.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting as well, because in this type of scenario as well, it quite often leads to a complete reset as well, doesn't it? So, and I think this period of adjustment we've all had to go through in the last 12 months, is exactly that. And in effect, it's also a really good opportunity to get things right, isn't it? So perhaps some of the failings from the past, not just in construction, but also in other areas of industry, it's a chance to really look at what hasn't worked well in the past and how we can reframe things in future. So in terms of the New World Order, you mentioned about some of the advances in some of the technology to do with buildings and performance and things like that. Are you able to give us a couple of examples of that as well?
Yeah, so there are statutory requirements, improvements about energy performance, about thermal performance and air tightness, things I've mentioned just now. I think the biggest jumps we've seen, and it's something we've been trying to, and we're still not there, but what this last year has taught us is that technology has, in terms of collaboration, and design has really been cemented in place. So 7 or 8 or 10 years ago, probably the government launched an initiative about building information modelling, which is about design and 3D design and clarity around design. That took quite a long time. There was a lot of hesitancy and a lot of cost as any new technology is launched, and about why it should be adopted. Slowly that has come to the fore, and now predominantly most designers are using that technology now. Then COVID strikes, and what we find is that everyone's being forced online, which no one ever thought we would be able to do and cope and be able to have online meetings, live streams and things like that as much. We weren't using it potentially all the time as an industry. We've been forced to use it now, and it's meant we have to use the technology. And it's starting to bring up questions now. So I'm going to be chairing an event very soon about how we actually collaborate. So, we've now got an experience of a year of having to use technology this way. How do you collaborate? So traditionally, design would have been, everyone would have sat around the table and coordinated designs together around a table with a pencil or a highlighter, in the good old days, as it were, working together. Whilst technology is fantastic, how do you do that now when you're online? How do you do that when you're in a virtual meeting? And the technology's there, what works, and how do we cement this to build on it for the future, not just use it as a temporary solution? How do we use this for the better? Because my biggest environmental use is transport, because you drive to lots of meetings, and I can be more productive in my time by not going to all those meetings by vehicle or traveling. but by doing them online. But secondly, how do we, I might be one of 10 in a meeting. So straight away, we can increase productivity and reduce our carbon footprint very, very quickly.
Yeah. That's really interesting. It's Renata's made a really interesting point here as well, actually, about London, and saying the way that companies start to look away and focus more on regenerating London, i.e. converting back to residential, which is quite an interesting thing. Now, obviously, Renata, I suppose you couldn't possibly comment, knowing the organisation you work for, but I'd be interested to know whether that's your own personal experience or view, whether indeed that lovely organisation, which I can't mention by name, is also considering doing that with some of its buildings. I'll leave you to your discretion whether you want to comment on that or not as well. And also, I think Splendid Engineering, by the way, is a chap called Daniel. Daniel does really exist, I promise you. But he's talking about net zero carbon as part of the current operating environment. What mechanisms, if any, do you use to make sure that business and buildings will remain consistent with the future operating environment? That's quite a big question, actually. Is that an easy one to answer or not?
Not easy, but I will expand on that. So
it's a bit simple for our audience as well, because I'm one of the simple ones I need to understand myself. So.
I also, for my sins, chair a constructing excellence. Well, I have chaired a constructing excellence committee, a regional one, and sat on the national board. And one of the things we were looking at is about very similar to, I think, that point is when we design buildings to perform to certain standards. Then we have to build them, and quite often, or more than often, the buildings don't perform as they've been designed. So there's a lot that goes into how a building performs, right from solar modelling and solar thermal modelling, right down to how it's actually being used by people when it actually becomes operational. So one of the things we've been doing is using digital twins. So you actually create the BIM model that we've been talking about earlier, and then you can actually install all the component parts into that model and actually control all of them. So the extra lights you get from heating, you can model the heat you get from computers. You can model how people are going to be moving around the building and where those people are going to be sitting or standing and how much heat they're going to be generating, where the windows might be open or not. So we can start putting a lot of data in, and it's very, very data intensive. But in that way, you can start by looking at how much energy the building is actually going to need and how much energy it's going to use. So I'm just reading these notes, but it is early technology yet. So we can do that digital twin to start modeling, and you can actually run seasonal models as well. So a lot of it is also about how efficient the commissioning is as well, and it's something I think something the industry is really looking at is how efficient and how good the commissioning is, and the digital twin can be part of that as well, because the more you model, the better the models are getting, the more the closer you can tweak the commissioning and then try and get that right. So that hopefully that's answered that question a bit about net zero carbon in operation, because whilst we build buildings and there's a lot of embedded carbon in the building and it's quite an energy intensive experience building the buildings then sit there doing their thing for 60 or 70 years, and actually most of the carbon output is during their life cycle when they're operating. So if we can make that as efficient as possible using commissioning and seasonal commissioning and digital twins and the like, then we're more likely to have a lesser effect on the environment.
Wow, that's lovely. No, thank you very much. I think what we'll do is move on to a slightly different theme now, if that's all right with you. Because going back to what you were actually saying a little bit at the beginning, because you talked a lot about the importance of having a real sense of social purpose and how it can be profitable as well. But have you, perhaps within your own teams or staff or your contractors, how have you adopted that philosophy, and how have you made people feel really good about working with your organisation? Can you give us some examples of practices you've adopted which perhaps encourage loyalty of your contractors and staff and teams and so on, and how that can perhaps face outwards towards your clients as well?
I think the key here, I must try and get back to Renato on her question as well in a minute, but I'll try and circle around onto that. how do we really get buy-in? I think, and the real key to that is focusing on outputs. Something we're really trying to do is understand what the real output of a building is going to be, or a construction project, or a series of buildings, so we can really add value to that project. Now, something we've identified is really key is getting buy-in from people. So if people just turn up to work thinking they're a bricklayer and they've just got to lay some bricks, then they're not really bought into that project. But if they know they're involved in a project that is going to be a new COVID hospital, or going to be a centre for cancer research, or whatever it may be, people start feeling much more engaged. So we've got to focus much more on what the output of that building is going to be, and the potential that building has on society. And once we start to inform people about that and understand that a bit more, we see much more engagement, loyalty, commitment. As I said, the construction industry has a bit of a bad reputation sometimes about commitment, but actually there's swathes of it. If you get it right, the construction can be the most loyal and hard-working industry, and it's a hugely positive and optimistic environment. But you've got to set those ground rules about what you want to achieve, what we need to achieve for those projects, and what the larger impact on society is. And I think once you start filtering that down to everybody, even the people who the cleaners of our site accommodation, things like that, when they understand they're involved in a process and going to do something for good, then I think you get much better engagement, you get much better quality as well.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, and obviously you've got a very good model where you are, because clearly to have sustained rates of growth during that period over a long period of time. I mean, I would imagine in your sector, I mean, if you went back sort of 90 or 100 years, how many of those the construction companies, what percentage of those still exist today? You obviously got some very big players like the Wimpeys and the Barretts and the others, but how many of those? What is it, like 2 or 3%, 5%?
I haven't done that analysis, but I would struggle. I wouldn't even think it's that many.
Wow. So for your organisation to be still, being the way you are now, and going from strength to strength, it says an awful lot about the success of your management and also your teams and the way you put things together as well. You must be very proud.
It's probably just a lot of hard work.
Yeah,
I wouldn't put it expertise, but
no. Well, obviously you're doing a lot right. So take a compliment when it's due. So, but no, that's really fantastic. I mean, if you look at the statistic of businesses generally, I think it's 80% of businesses actually fell within 5 years. 90% fell within 10. So, and you've been around almost 100 years, and you're still continuing to grow at a phenomenal rate. And again, I think it's a really good point, this actually, because the question really was around with running a business with strong set of social purpose and how it can be profitable.
Yeah.
Well, a living, breathing example of that, aren't you? So you can run a really good business. It can be highly profitable, and actually you can have very strong ethics as well. That's something we can all learn from, actually. So thanks for that. And
that's the golden egg, I think, Rupert. Golden egg, running a successful business. It's got social purpose and delivers continually. Yeah.
No, lovely. I love it. Thank you. And obviously, we are in extraordinary times at the moment. Are you able to give some examples of where it has required exceptional leadership in terms of trying to hold things together? You may not be able to mention the project because there may be rules of confidentiality around it, but has there something that's sort of really blown up in your face over the last 12 months, which perhaps wouldn't have happened otherwise? Or have you had, for example, without mentioning names, perhaps 1 or 2 suppliers or contracts where perhaps it's left you very severely out of pocket? And how have you managed some of these more challenging situations?
We've had probably all of the above to a certain extent. But I'd say the most challenging thing around leadership I've had in the last year is keeping the team safe and engaged, and that has weighed heavily on my shoulders. We had, this time last year, we were entering a period of who knows what. And I was very concerned about my team. And when I say my team, I don't just mean the company. I mean all our suppliers and subcontractors we use, because we probably involved with 300 or 400 people at any one time who are on our projects, and our clients. So yeah, this has been a challenging time for leadership. And as a leader, we don't know what's happening. We have to. This time last year, or in a month's time, we started to have to take in an awful lot of information very quickly, almost on a daily basis. We'd have a daily briefing. You'd have to sit down, write a plan on that briefing, and understand what that briefing actually meant, and have to react very quickly. And that was a really interesting time, for quite a challenging time as a leader, I think, as a leader of a business, and trying to also let people know that it's safe and how we can work around those things, because a lot of people wanted to down tools immediately, and it's a very difficult thing to stop the economy, stop business continuing. Everyone has different agendas, and contracts don't allow for that sort of thing. Even if they did under force majeure, I don't think that will hold up in the law of court, and that requires a court of law to dictate that. So we couldn't rely on everything. So relationships were very important with our clients and with our supply chain, and with people, with members of the direct team as well. So that's probably been my biggest challenge over the last year, and I learned a lot of lessons.
No.
I hope we got through it in the right way. I'm very happy with a lot of the principles we came through with, and the team have been fantastic, and our supply chain and clients have been great. But I still learned a lot of lessons.
No, I mean, obviously I can imagine that as well. And has there been like a period since you effectively took over the day-to-day control of running the company, when you perhaps come in one day and thought, shit, something's gone horribly wrong? Have you had a scenario where perhaps a major contractor has gone bust, and you've perhaps ended up by not getting paid, and then that's caused huge cash flow issues? And have you ever had to turn around to your staff and say, look, we've got a real problem this month. We need to work together to try and make sure that we keep this show on the road? Have you had some real crisis moments within Francis Construction? If so, how have you personally cut through those? Never happened.
I don't tend to remember those. It's a bit like childbirth. I can't confess to know what childbirth's like, so sorry to all the ladies out there who are I've offended by saying it's a bit like. But I don't think you remember the bad times. Otherwise, you wouldn't go through them. But the bits I do remember. So the bits I do remember is when we really went for a project. So we targeted a project that we really wanted to win and deliver, and it was a big step up for us. So our average project size 7 or 8 years ago was about 1 and 1.5 million, and to deliver a 2.5 to 3 million pound project was rare for us. And we really targeted a project for Wokingham Borough Council, and it was a new school. And we put a lot of effort into the tender and the bid and trying to secure this project. And I remember I was actually away when we got awarded the project. I was on holiday with my family, and I got the phone call just to say, someone just let you know we've won this project. And I remember thinking huge relief. And then I remember thinking, right, now we've got to deliver this. And it was a big step for us. It's a £3 million project. And I thought, wow, this is starting to get serious. We've got to work out how to do this. And now I look back, and our biggest project is 9 million now. And I think, wow, that was a real milestone that I worried about that at the time. Now that's our sort of bread and butter work. And that was a real milestone in my thinking about what we can actually achieve.
Right. So basically, you managed to push the boundaries, really. You cut through those perceived boundaries, and you smashed through them, did a fantastic job. And that now it's almost become a daily occurrence for you to... Well,
it doesn't feel like that all the time, but yeah, we did do a very good job on that project. It's one I'm very proud of, and it was a hurdle, a sort of barrier for entry, and we completed it really well, and we've gone from strength to strength from that. But every day as a school day, I'm not going to profess to be perfect, and we can always improve. So it's a consistent improvement. I think the day you stand still and think you've got it is the day you start going backwards.
Yeah, 100%. Well, you become ultimately dead in the water. You become like the dodo, don't you? So if you carry on like that. The other part as well, it's an interesting point because we talked about this, and something you feel very strongly about is why it's, basically the question I really is why select customers that are true to your core values. I like the word select, by the way, because it suggests that you're not just going for every piece of business that's actually out there. Everything you do is based around your core values. But why is that so important to you, would you say?
I think that's just as I was actually saying, when we went into lockdown, I was in daily or weekly contact with all of our customers. And I was updating them weekly on what we thought we were doing or how we think we're doing, what the implications were. These were very uncertain circumstances, and there's a lot of money. When we stop construction sites, we burn a lot of money very quickly. It costs a lot of money just to run and open and operate a construction site. And we went into this period of uncertainty, and there was no contractual mechanism for it. There was no recovery. We're all contracted to quite tight programs and financial models. So it was a very uncertain time. So being able to talk to customers who understood our position and had similar values meant that we could chart a path through what are contractually never occurred times almost, because when we've had pandemics before in other countries or in historic times, there weren't the sort of contracts that we have in place now. So they were uncharted waters, and we had to chart those paths. So I think that was a really good example of why having those really strong relationships and having similar values with customers is really important. Now, going back to your earlier point about selecting customers, I wouldn't like to say we interview all of our customers before we get into contract, but it's not far wrong. When we go to interview, we do, whilst we're always very keen, we go through quite an in-depth process to decide whether we want to tender for a piece of work as well, to check whether contractually it's sound, if we actually agree with what's been happening, how the contract's been put together, how the information's been together, the level of quality of design. We go through all these processes, but when we go to an interview, we always think that it's a good time for us to see the whites of, as much as they want to see the whites of our eyes because they're contracting with us, we get a chance to see the whites of their eyes as well. And we, as I said earlier about collaboration, we want to work with clients who want us to add value and value our opinion, and I think that's been really important. And that's why I think we've had such growth, is that once we start working with a client, they tend to ask us questions and they want to come back to us. So our whole ethos is that, the next time they want to do a project, they'll come and ask us for our help, regardless of that's actually with the build, even if it's for advice about how they might want to go about something. And then we can start having our influence or helping the project in any way as early as possible.
Yeah, I think especially in your particular space, in the construction industry, as you say, generally doesn't have a great rap, does it? And especially also quite often the way a lot of companies can actually end up by treating subcontractors as well, because some of them can be really predatory, can't they? And you could, I won't be held to this because I may be factually wrong, but for example, wasn't there a scenario with Canary Wharf when it was first built that the company, basically the actual main people behind Canary Wharf, company went bust, and it literally took hundreds of suppliers with it at the time, and then basically didn't then resurface under another name, and weren't some of the original people involved in that part as well? I don't know the detail, and probably maybe you can't say.
That was a bit before my time.
Yeah.
That doesn't surprise me. I don't think that's exclusive to construction, actually. There's plenty of businesses that Phoenix and then come back. But yeah, construction does have a bit of a bad reputation, but it does some fantastic things. If you think of the enablers that it does, and that's some of what frustrates me, is that we do some fantastic things, and there's lots of great initiatives out there, things like the prompt payment code, which we've signed up to, and the government monitor and publish a results table on a monthly basis, which mainly focused on the main contractors. But trying to make sure that money flows properly. There's lots of really exciting technology about drones being able to scan the building and release payment, so they can scan a wall and see how much of the wall is built, and they'll use the Bitcoin algorithms to check that against how much money has been allowed for in the contract, and then that can release payment directly to that subcontractor, not through the main contractor, but directly to the subcontractor in whatever currency is. They're not talking about using Bitcoin, but using some of the security measures and the algorithms that Bitcoin use. So there's some really exciting things, and we are starting to use drones more and more to survey and check and scan. So it's not a million miles away. It can be done. So it's very exciting. So hopefully technology we can use as a force for good and promote fairness and trust in the industry, because it's something has been challenged in the past, and I'm up for reinstating it.
Yeah, good. Renato's raised a really interesting thing there about through COVID that his organisation, which he represents, were surprised that none of their suppliers claimed force majeure as they were expecting, but rather just basically requested that the organisation was much more tolerant of any delays. So that's actually really encouraging, actually. And it's interesting what he's saying there about they used to keep 20% back, which only paid on completion construction. So there's some really good points coming out of here. I'm sorry, by the way, those of you who may not have really got to in terms of these points, by the way, if you've got some questions, do drop them in here. We're really keen to hear what those are, and obviously we can ask Will while we got on the call, about those. I suppose there's one sort of last question, and we'll start to go to a little bit more of a wrap up, if that's all right, Will. And that is basically, clearly, I assume the business was it formed originally by your great grandfather or something like that, or? No,
it was formed by the Francis family, who aren't related to us. I know I think I've got an invoice from a company we still work for, a stonemason from about 1914. They sent across to us recently when we were doing a project with them. They're also a family business. And they said, nice to see you paid us on time then, and we're still paying them on time now, which was nice to see. But unfortunately, that family fell on difficult times in the late 50s, early 60s, and my grandfather amalgamated his construction business with the Francis business and kept the name with his brother, so my great uncle, and then my uncle and my father took it on from them, and I'm taking on from my father.
Wow, nice. Yeah. Have you got kids yourself now?
I have, yeah. Can't you tell?
How old are they?
10, 7, and 5.
Right. It's very young, but have any of them got a desire possibly to follow in Dad's footsteps?
They're changing their minds. One may they want to be a skateboarder. Sometimes they want to be an architect. They're all quite good at Lego, and they're all quite good at drawing. So we'll see. I don't know if I can hang on that long. But they're very welcome. But they're not under any force to join this.
Yeah, that's always the problem, isn't it? When you find that perhaps two or three generations of thoroughly love and getting involved with the business, then suddenly it sort of finishes and history, things go into history, as it were. But also that leads nicely on to the final question, which is really about how to leave a lasting legacy with your business. Now, obviously, we talk about family members here, but what are some of the principles that you adopt as far as this is concerned? What's the bigger driver for where you want to see Francis Construction being in a few years' time, or for you personally, what would you like to see happen over the next 20 years?
I spent quite a bit of time thinking about this, about what I wanted from my career, really, because I'm a fairly driven individual, and you keep wanting to grow and do better. But I took a couple of years ago, I started thinking about what I really wanted out of my career and life, really, because you spend a lot of time thinking, just going on and on and on, and I came to the point where I want to be successful, but money is not a massive driver for me. I want to live a good life and support my family. But the big driver for me is creating a legacy for my family, for if they do want to go on and help provide a good life for my children's children and my wider family. But the biggest driver for me is creating a better, a better social output, I think. Whether that's challenging, that can come in any way from challenging the norm about how quickly we can deliver social housing. So we've done quite a lot of work recently about speeding up how quickly we can deliver social housing by challenging traditional methods. So can we, one thing we identified is we can actually probably deliver a house from inception of a potential site in about half the time if we work in partnership with clients and housing associations and local authorities, rather than going through the traditional land acquisition, planning, tendering process. We can actually take it through much quicker and the most important thing is get people into those homes who need them, who need the extra support. And that's a way to improve social cohesion, and also improve the quality of people's lives. Once they've got a roof over their head, they're much more able to and they've got a stable place to live and develop. They're much more able to add and play their part in society as well.
Nice. Yeah, I've seen. Do you get involved as a firm in part ownership as well? Part rent, part owned, like shared ownership.
In several ways, yes, we do. Yeah, but tends to be through our contracts with our clients rather than ourselves doing that. So we tend to partner with housing associations who do the shared ownership schemes, and similarly we're seeing more and more local authorities actually doing that themselves as well.
Yeah.
So we're working with Woking at the moment, Slough Borough Council, Reading Borough Council as well, and South Oxfordshire as well. So there's multiple schemes on at the moment to provide and improve that social housing, and there's some great quality housing, and I'm quite envious of it sometimes when I see us finish it. I think I actually quite like to live there. They're very nice. They're really good quality, which is a credit to the HAs and the local authorities who commission that work as well.
Yeah, lovely. Well, thank you. Muriel, whilst I'm just going to do a quick wrap up on a few of these points, but while I'm doing that, can you quickly look through the chat and see whether, I think Nikki, for example, has made a point there. We might have missed one or two others, so perhaps we could discuss those in a moment. But also, those of you who are still with us, please do feel you can ask a couple of quick closing questions. We'll try and see whether we can sneak those through. In the meantime, I'll just quickly highlight what's on next week. We've got some of you had wondered where Chris was. Chris is still very much around. He's going to be on the show next week. I'm going to be interviewing Chris, and he's going to be talking about building your brand and key insights learned from hosting 400 shows. I think he's just passed 400 interviews on Voice America, and he's going to be sharing some insights around that. Also, some of the stories of success derived from hardship, which is through some of his people he's engaged with on his program over the last 2 years, and pointing out you can never be too young or too old in business. And it's going to be talking about lasting legacy again, but with the words, interesting enough, about with some of his guests which are now deceased. I'm not sure whether he's got a very good way of communicating with people who've now since moved on or not, but no doubt he'll share us some insights as far as that's concerned, and how you can, some business managers to reinvent themselves, and how we can all contribute to a better world. So I think that's going to be a really interesting program next week. And obviously, I would urge everyone here to think about how you can support each other, develop a strong culture of help and support and referrals, have a deep referral mindset. That way we can all help each other and grow. We do have our mini conference next Tuesday. We're doing it a bit differently next week, actually. The first half is going to be sharing a lot of market insights, top tips, and also how to get best out of LinkedIn and how you can win more business. And the second part is actually going to be much more of a mini a series of breakout sessions or a workshop, so people can have a chance to ask questions, seek some guidance from me, but also from others within the group. So if you'd like to register for next week's mini conference, that's on Tuesday, and it's going to be covering these main areas here about bringing your sales forward, amplifying your brand for growth, and leveraging technology. And we'll be discussing about your ideal product mix, your marketing mix, and also how you can get the best out of LinkedIn, and some insights around that as well. And in terms of being able to access these in future, all these are accessible via the homepage of our website, and the live streams are available through there, and you can also pre-book multiple weeks. So those of you who are doing this for the first time, join us for the first time today, just simply choose, instead of choose continue, choose the recurring option, and it saves you booking each week. The calendar system will remind you of that and send you the notifications in advance. And if you want to do a bit of a deep dive into your business and find out how well it's performing, you can also complete business growth, sales and marketing diagnostic. And we've actually enhanced that over the last 10 years or so now. So you actually get quite a detailed printed report, which is about 7 pages based on the responses you've given. And obviously, if you want to have a bit of a discussion afterwards, what that actually means to you in your business, then again, that's available. And there's no charge for that. And here are the contact details as well. We will have a quick wrap up in a moment to do with some final questions or comments. Basically, Will here is obviously be very pleased to hear from his the website. There is francisconstruction.co.uk, and Will's phone number is there, and his email address is will@francisconstruction.co.uk. So obviously, thank you very much, Will, for your very big contribution today. It's really appreciated. And what we'll do, let me just bring everyone back in again. So let's look at some questions. Muriel, any ones we've missed first of all before we come to any?
I'm not sure whether you answered Daniel's. Let me show it on screen.
Yeah.
That when I was talking about the digital twin and how we compare operational output to designed output. So hopefully that answered Daniel's question. But I can see one from Renato and Nikki, mainly talking about the snags and successful completion. So there are contractual mechanisms. So usually within a contract, we'll have some money withheld at the end. Usually it's 5% of the contract value. And then at practical completion, which is when the building is finished, that normally reduces to 2.5%. And then within that contract, there's usually a making good defects period, which is usually 6 or 12 months, can be longer. And there's many arguments to make it longer now. So part of that operating efficiency is brought into it. It's called soft landings. But usually it's 12 months, and that 2.5% will be released at 12 months. And 2.5% is an industry golden egg. That is the profit margin for most construction companies that they like to achieve. So it's a significant proportion on projects. So that's why they keep, that gets held back to 12 months after completion, so those snags get dealt with. But there are other mechanisms. And again, if you're really focused on a good client relationship, you want to resolve those snags early. So we do many strategies like quarterly health checks post-completion and stay in touch with our clients. So we address those issues as quickly and efficiently as possible. So we have minimal disruption on the outputs of those buildings and outcomes of those buildings.
Yeah. It's really interesting what you're saying here as well. In fact, Alex Redden on this call today will remember this because previously was responsible for about 5,000 people in IBM. But there used to be a saying years ago in the PC space when IBM were the rulers of these big trunks you used to have on your desk called PCs, and then of course you start to get PC compatible machines being introduced. But there was a saying that's very much put around at the time, which is you never get fired for buying IBM. Obviously, these days you could argue that Microsoft became became almost that there in the corporate world. I think things moved on a bit, but it used to be a similar saying when Microsoft started to get involved, because a lot of the big companies wouldn't deal with a lot of the smaller contractors because they'd always play safe and go with the established part here. I suppose it is a case in point. Would you say you become almost like a really safe pair of hands now? So in many instances, you become like the supplier of choice, so in other words, by providing excellence in everything that you do, that even if in some instances you come across as being perhaps perceived to be more expensive, you will actually still win through because you're not going to cause any problems for that companies. Because is that part of your philosophy?
That's exactly our strategy. Yeah, our internal mantra is being the regional contractor of choice. So when someone needs something done, they phone us because we don't want to be the cheapest. We want to offer the best value, and we want to take on a long-term approach. It's about not being greedy. It's about working together to understand the outcomes and provide the best value.
Right, lovely. Yeah, and obviously that goes to show as well, it can make good commercial sense as well. I mean, if you're operating to extremely low margins like that as well, you know, you only need to get something slightly wrong and you've got a problem, haven't you? So also by having a very good relationship with all those organisations you work with, it's a win-win from both directions, isn't it? So,
and also having transparent discussions around risk, because there's a lot of risk in construction. So if you've got an open relationship, you can have a fairly proper discussions around risk and who's the most appropriate person, how to mitigate risk as well.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, I'd just like to, first of all, thank Will very much for sharing your insights today. I've certainly learned a lot, and I think it's so encouraging to hear of business, directors of businesses or business owners wanting to share, run a business with a real sense of social purpose. You see a lot of unfortunate corporate greed out there as well. See and that's. It's good to know that mid-sized companies as well, such as your own, choose to do some things quite differently and really lead with a sense of social purpose. I think many people who've joined us today, obviously I know a lot of those who've joined us today also are very much driven by that as well. So thank you very much everyone for joining in, and we'll see you next week. Should be a great session next week, and we'll stay on. We'll have a bit of a chat in the green room with Muriel afterwards. So thank you very much everyone. You take care.
Thank you, Rupert. Thank you, Muriel.
Thank you. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.